The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi everyone, and welcome to ACECRT's June webinar, where we'll be discussing designing your financial roadmap. We appreciate all of you taking the time to join us here today. A couple items to go over before we started. First, in order to ensure everyone has the ability to hear the information presented by our guest speaker, everyone will be on mute during the webinar. Second, please feel free to write in any questions you have using the webinar Q&A tool on the menu. At the end of the webinar, we will take the time to go through these together. Third, there will be polling questions throughout today's webinar. All results are anonymous, and we appreciate your participation. Now I'd like to introduce you to our guest speaker of Fidelity, Miguel Marquez. Miguel has been with Fidelity for over 8 years, and his current role is education consultant. Miguel received a Bachelor of Science degree from New Mexico State University. He currently holds his Series 6, 7, and 63 licenses. Thank you for presenting today, Miguel, and now I'll turn it over to you.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Once again, Miguel with Fidelity Investments, speaking to you all out of our Dallas, Fort Worth, Texas area office. Thank you for your time this afternoon. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay and can see the screen just fine. Designing your financial roadmap. That is the topic of today's presentation. As far as what we're going to do to kick things off, you heard Renata mention we're going to have a few polling questions throughout today's presentation. The first thing that we wanted to start off with the question you see on the screen right now. How confident do you feel in your current finance strategy? Do you feel very confident, somewhat confident, or I have no financial strategy at this point in time? Those are the three answers for the question posed to you all at this point in time. Go ahead and answer that if you don't mind. Then we'll address the agenda for today's presentation as we go on. Hopefully we address any issues, any questions you might have across the board, whether you are very confident or whether you don't have a financial strategy per se in your own financial situation. So once again, how confident do you feel in your current financial situation? It looks like 40% of you are very confident and 60% of you are somewhat confident. So fortunately, we don't have anyone in the third option, which is I have no financial strategy. So that's good to see that we're either somewhat or very confident in regards to our own personal financial situation and strategy. The overall purpose of today's presentation will focus on designing your financial roadmap. So as we go through the remainder of the presentation, you'll see that it's a broad range of topics we'll cover across the board, whether you are very confident, somewhat confident, or even for those folks that might have been on the line that have no financial strategy in place. We cover a lot with this particular presentation. So we'll kick things off with the title of today's presentation, once again, Designing Your Financial Roadmap. As far as the agenda goes, as I just mentioned, it's very broad in scope. We're going to start off by talking about maximizing your retirement savings opportunities here within your 401k plan. We're going to follow that up by discussing how you can balance your non-retirement savings goals, so any goals you have outside of work, with your retirement savings goals. We'll briefly touch on ways to expand your investment and portfolio strategy for any of these particular goals, how to organize and protect your savings in regards to saving for healthcare costs should any emergency needs come up in association with healthcare, as well as assigning beneficiaries to various accounts. So we'll talk about that and then wrap things up by going over how you can stay on track, how you can utilize some of the various Fidelity resources as well as your own company resources after today's presentation, and should you have any questions. Okay, so we'll start with how to utilize your 401k plan here. Of course, your workplace savings plan is one of the best tools you're going to have to help you get prepared for retirement. It's easy and convenient to save into. You're saving directly out of your paycheck. The investment choices will be broad and expansive across the board, depending on how hands-on you want to be or how hands-off you want to be. So there are lots of different investment options that you can utilize, and start researching those on your 401k website, which is netbenefits.com. If you're not registered for online access, I certainly recommend you do that. Go to Net Benefits, register for online access, start researching all the different tools and resources, but in regards to that second bullet point, you can start researching the different investment choices you have in your 401k plan. Depending on how you contribute into your 401k plan, you are able to potentially lower your taxable income if you are a traditional 401k contributor, because of course those are pre-tax contributions. Being that they're pre-tax contributions, that's going to lower your taxable income. Tax-deferred growth goes hand in hand with that, because those are pre-tax contributions in a traditional 401k. Your investments grow tax-deferred, meaning you'll pay those taxes on the back end whenever you retire and start taking distributions out of your traditional 401k. Lastly, as far as compounded growth potential goes, obviously the earlier you get started, the better situated you're going to be to retire more comfortably. So as time goes on, if you can get started and you're still fairly young on the phone and you've got more time to retire, get started as early as possible. Let that money work in your favor with time, and letting your interest compound and the earnings compound to increase your overall growth potential. So it's a great tool to take advantage of, and it leads me into the slide that you see on the screen right now. Ultimately, when it comes to retirement, there are four main sources of income that we all have. Some are more prominent than others, but when it comes to retirement, the four main sources of income that we have are Social Security, which we all know, private pension plans, which are essentially becoming extinct. You don't hear about pension plans as often as you once did. I'm sure parents or grandparents are very familiar with those, but most of us no longer take advantage of pension plans of any sort. Number three is income from personal assets, such as your 401k plan here at work. Perhaps you have an IRA established outside of work. Maybe you have real estate income that you derive income off of. So that's number three. Number four is wages in retirement, meaning you are still working during those retirement years. And unfortunately, when I do these meetings across different companies and speak with participants of different backgrounds, more times than not, when I meet someone that should technically be retired but is still working, usually they're still working because they have to, not necessarily because they want to. When it comes to retirement and things that we do during our retirement years, if you want to work, that's perfectly fine and well, but it should be because you want to and not because you have to. And that's the whole point of taking advantage of your retirement savings plan. Save for retirement. And I'll show you the importance of that right now. If you look at the first pie chart, you'll notice that the dominant source of income was Social Security back in 1974. The remaining parts of income weren't as prominent as Social Security, but what happened between 1974 and 1999, you saw Social Security dwindle down to 18% as your source of income. What you saw take over was wages in retirement. That doubled between 74 and 99, meaning more and more people were still working, having to go back to work because they didn't save enough for retirement. So fast forward to 2030, the estimate is that, yes, there's still going to be a large percentage of people deriving income from wages, but we also see an expansion in income from personal assets. Between the second pie chart in 1999 and the third one on the right-hand side, you'll notice that income from personal assets doubles as well. So as time goes on, we expect more of us as 401k participants to put that dependency on ourselves as opposed to being dependent on Social Security or having to work during those retirement years. So it's an ever-changing landscape. That's where we have seen it in the past, and that's where we expect it to be in the future. We've got a second follow-up polling question here for those of you on the phone. The question reads as such: how much are you currently contributing to your employer's retirement plan? Are you contributing between 1% and 5%? Are you contributing between 5% and 10%? Are you contributing 11% or more? Or are you not currently contributing at this time? And this is going to be a perfect segue into the next slide that we're going to show you in this presentation. So once again, how much are you currently contributing to your employer's retirement plan? 1 to 5%, 5 to 10%, 11% or more, or you are currently not contributing? So let's take a look at the results. It looks like most of you fall in the 11% or more, which is awesome. That's great to see. So 80% of you are contributing 11% or more. 20% of you are contributing between 5 and 10%. So that makes the next slide significantly easier for me to present because it talks about how much we should be saving for retirement. A good rule of thumb to follow is that you should be saving between 10 to 15% of your paycheck. Now, if you're brand new, fresh to the 401k market, you've never participated in a 401k, 10 to 15% might seem high. I always tell people start with what you can afford and then work your way up to that 10 to 15% benchmark. That's a good rule of thumb, okay? Ultimately, that's where we want you. If you can contribute more than that, that's even greater. But we want you at least in that 10 to 15% range to help you prepare better for retirement. We also have, as an FYI, the IRS limits on the screen. So the maximum that you can contribute this year is $18,000 into your 401k plan. However, if you are age 50 or older, you can take advantage of a catch-up contribution in the form of an additional $6,000. So if you are age 50 or older, your IRS limit is $24,000 this year. Those of you under the age of 50, $18,000 is your IRS maximum allowed into contributing into your 401k plan. Those numbers every few years get adjusted upwards for cost of living adjustments. They have been these numbers for the last 2 years, so this will be, I believe, the 3rd year that we're sitting at these particular maximums. So perhaps in the next year or two you might see this increase by $500 or $1,000. We're not sure. The IRS usually lets us know in November or December whether they're going to change those IRS limits. But for this year, those are the IRS limits. Now, earlier I mentioned the earlier you can get started in saving for retirement to take advantage of compounding growth, the better off you're going to be situated for saving and your own personal retirement. This slide does, I feel that this does a good job of showing you in this example why the importance of getting started early and how much you save for retirement can significantly impact how much you have when it comes to retiring. So what you have here are 3 different levels of contributions, 6, 8, and 10%, over a 25-year time period at 3 different salary levels, $30,000, $50,000, and $75,000. If we look at the first example, let's say that you earn $30,000 a year and you contribute 8% of your paycheck over 25 years, assuming a 7% annual rate of return on your money. That should put you in the neighborhood of about $261,000 to have for retirement. If you can bump that up by 2% and contribute 10%, you'll have about $313,000 saved for retirement. So you can see that a 2% difference over 25 years makes quite the impact when it comes to retiring. Of course, if you earn more money, then the differences are going to be significant, and they will be, of course, greater. So as an example, if you earn $50,000 and you contribute 8%, as you can see, you're just shy of $400,000. If you bump that up by 2%, you've increased your retirement savings over 25 years by almost $85,000. So now you have about $485,000. So again, start as early as you can. If you got started late in life, take advantage of catch-up contributions if you can, and just save as much as you can into your 401k plan and let that time that you do have work on your behalf. So that's why we wanted to show you that particular slide. Now, the next section of the presentation focuses on balancing your other savings goals outside of your 401k and your retirement. Obviously, in life, we have short-term goals, we have long-term goals, and that's what we're going to discuss. along with the importance of evaluating how your allocations align with each one of those particular goals and needs. So let's start off by discussing what your short-term and your long-term goals are, and introduce balancing your other savings goals across the board. The important thing to do when it comes to balancing your savings goals is identify your short-term versus your long-term goals. Rank the priority of each goal. Which one's the most important to you? Focus on those goals and attack those goals and do what you can to achieve them. And then, of course, know the trade-offs, the time horizons, and the costs of achieving each particular goal. So let's discuss a few examples in regards to that. A short-term goal, as an example, would be setting up and establishing an emergency fund. The time horizon on that is short. The money you need for that is going to be less than if you were saving for college or retirement, where the time horizons will be significantly longer and the amount of money required to achieve that goal will be more significant. So rank your priority in regards to what you have here. Obviously, retirement should be a fairly significant priority, so focus on that. But we understand emergencies arise. You might need a vacation. You might need a new home, a new car. There are other goals that you can also focus on and rank accordingly. As far as short-term goals go, these are going to be goals that you have within the next 2 to 5 years. We have a few examples on the screen right now. We mentioned one, which is an emergency fund. Vacation, I mentioned verbatim. A new car, a home renovation. These are all short-term examples. And options for you to keep this money, you want to consider investments that focus on safety and capital preservation. In other words, when it comes to these short-term goals, you don't want to lose this money because you're going to need it fairly soon. So you might keep this money in a money market account, in a savings account at a local bank, perhaps even a CD of some sort, because the chances of you losing this money are very, very minimal. Not only that, but your money here is going to be liquid, meaning you can access it, you can liquidize it and utilize it much easier than if you had it invested in stocks that take a couple of days to settle, or a mutual fund that also might take a day or two to settle out and get deposited into your own bank account. So keep this money liquid, keep it safe and preserved as far as how you have this money invested. To complement that are your long-term goals. These are goals that you have 5 years or more to go. Home purchase, college, these are going to be some examples of long-term goals. And because these are long-term goals, you can consider investments with longer time horizons and tolerance to take on additional risk. Meaning you can take on higher risk for the potential of greater rewards over the next 5, 10, 20 years, okay? Historically, the stock market has gone up over the past 20, 50, 100 years, and if your time horizon is longer, if it is 5, 10, 20 years, then that's what you're doing, is you're increasing that potential for risk with the higher potential for returns at the same time. Tools that you can utilize for these longer term goals, you can open up a mutual fund account, a home equity loan, or a line of credit. There are various college savings opportunities. I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, are aware of 529 plans, perhaps a UGMA. There are prepaid college tuition services across the U.S., depending on what state you're in. If you're in California, they may or may not. I'm not entirely sure if you have one. Here in Texas, we have prepaid tuition packages and websites that you can work with that are state-sponsored as well. So lots of tools for saving for college out there. One area that we tend to forget to save for, aside from inflation, is healthcare costs. I mentioned inflation because I always have friends bring that up. They'll forget about saving. They'll think about keeping their money safe and in the cash account, not earning anything, and forget about inflation. With healthcare, you'll know that historically over the last, I think it's over the last 50 years or so, the rate of healthcare costs in the U.S. have risen at about 6% a year. The past 50 years for inflation has been about 3% a year. So the fact that healthcare is twice that of course, that's unfortunate to see that, but it is something that we can prepare for as time goes on. So make sure that you have adequate coverage across the board, and we'll talk about the 4 main sources of coverage you need here in just a second. but you want long-term care, and you need, if you're going to retire early, then of course you need adequate coverage across the board, so that your cash flow isn't affected by this. It takes one significant emergency to impact greatly your cash flow that you had dependent on retirement. So make sure that healthcare is something that you support and that you save for should that need arise. When it comes to how you're invested, we talked about a few different areas that you can utilize as far as short-term goals versus long-term goals. Make sure you're invested properly depending on what that goal is. You can make sure that your current investment mix is aligned with that particular goal. And if you are too aggressive for a short-term goal, then it might be time to revisit that strategy. And the same goes for the opposite. If you're too conservative for a retirement goal or something further out in time frame, then you could certainly look at considering other more aggressive options with the potential for higher returns as time goes on. And that's why we mentioned that. Now, the next section of this presentation focuses on organizing and protecting what you have saved up to this point. So we'll talk about the importance of beneficiary designations and how insurance can play a huge part in your overall multi-goal savings plan. Let's start by protecting what you have. It takes 2 steps to organize and protect what you've got. Check your emergency fund, which we mentioned earlier. 3 to 6 months of savings is what you should have saved up for an emergency goal. Verify your beneficiaries. If you haven't looked at your beneficiaries in the last year or two, it's time to take a look at them, especially if you just went through a major life event. Marriages, divorces, kids, those are typically the ones that I see that can cause the most headaches when you forget to remove an ex-spouse or get married and add a new spouse. And if you have some sort of estate planning documents, if you have a will or a trust or perhaps an organization that you want to assign as your beneficiaries, you can certainly do that too. It's just the matter of getting it done and monitoring your beneficiaries at least annually, but especially after you have kids, you got divorced, or you got married, in regards to your beneficiaries. Okay, so organize, protect what you have. We certainly would prefer it going to one of your beneficiaries than through probate. Okay. We need to set up and establish an emergency fund. You just heard me mention when it comes to setting up an emergency fund, you should have at least 3 to 6 months worth of living expenses. If you need to budget that out, that's not a problem. We have budgeting worksheets on the 401k website. I'm sure you can find your own as well on Google. But if you're looking for the Fidelity specific budgeting worksheet, just go to Net Benefits, or you can call Fidelity and we can find that for you and shoot it out via email. And then you heard me mention this earlier. Keep it safe, keep it liquid, easily accessible if and when that emergency and need ever arise. Okay. Now, as far as beneficiaries go, again, make sure they're assigned and set in a way that you want them to be set. When it comes to beneficiaries, you can set your primary beneficiary. You can also set secondary beneficiaries and split them across multiple beneficiaries across the board. But it's important that you do something, especially after those major life events that I just mentioned. So it was worth reiterating and making sure that you are aware that if you went through a big life event, you need to make updates to your beneficiaries. Now, earlier you heard me mention healthcare and insurance coverages. Make sure you have adequate coverage and know your limits across the 4 major policies you see on the screen right now: health insurance, life insurance, disability, and long-term care. Those are the 4 insurance policies you should be most familiar with and know what your coverages are across the board here. And if you need to purchase any sort of supplemental coverage to cover significant gaps, certainly consider that as well in regards to covering your overall insurance policies. Next, we're going to talk about how to make paying down high interest debt a priority. So we'll have a polling question here in just a bit, but we'll focus on debt to income ratio, consumer spending trends, and things you can do to reduce bad debt across the board. So when it comes to the U.S., obviously we all know that spending as a consumer is what drives our economy. We're spending more than we're saving, though, and that's where the issue comes up. 46.2% of all families carry some sort of credit card balance, but only 7% make the minimum payment alone. If you're only making a minimum payment on a $3,000 limit or balance, you're going to be paying on that for a very significant time frame. So it's important that you do your best to pay more than just that minimum payment. 13.44% is the average APR on credit cards. Simply put, we live on credit. It's what drives the economy as we spend. But things that you need to remember when it comes to debt, of course, don't spend money you don't have, and we'll talk about that here in just a second as well. As far as debt to income ratio, how much debt is too much debt? It should not exceed 36%. That's a rule of thumb when it comes to debt to income ratio. Monthly long-term debt that's factored in here would be your mortgage, credit card payments, loan payments, and any other expenses that you might have at any point in time. Other expenses is a broad and a very mixed bag for us, but those are typically what get factored into your debt to income ratio. So let's follow up by addressing the next polling question that you see on the screen right now. Which of the following debt interest rates should you focus on paying off first? 5.27%, 7.04%, or 13.99%? Once again, which of the following debt interest rates should you focus on paying off first? I know there are varying schools of thoughts around this, not to put any pressure on you all, but the first session did get it exactly how it should have been answered, which we'll see how the outcome is in this case, but go ahead and answer that question and then we'll address it as soon as we see those responses come back to us. So it looks like you all answered the same way that our first class did. Which of the following debt interest rates should you focus on paying off first? Debt with higher interest rates. So in this case, 100% went to 13.99%. Now, I understand there are different schools of thoughts on this out there. I'm sure some of you have heard of the name David Ramsey. He's a financial guru that a lot of my friends and a lot of other just associates, coworkers, friends from past listen to. And his school of thought on this is a little bit different. Personally, I think if you attack any debt and you're focusing on paying off debt, that's a good thing. But when it comes to paying off debt, one of the best approaches that we see is attacking the high interest rate debt first while making minimum payments on your other forms of debt, and then utilizing any free assets, any free funds that you have to continue paying off that high interest rate debt first. Okay, so it's a great response from everyone. Thank you for your time in regards to that particular question. We'll go ahead and continue the presentation here now. Let me see if I can move to the next slide just yet. So here we go. It leads us directly into this slide here. So paying down high interest rate debt first, as you just heard me mention, if you have extra savings laying around, use that to pay this debt off first. Work with that account that has the high interest rate first, pay it off, and as you also just heard me mention, make your minimum required payments on your other credit to avoid any penalties and fees you might be assessed otherwise. And then once you focus on paying off that high interest rate debt, as you might naturally have already thought, attack your other forms of debt soon thereafter. Now, we'll quickly touch on monitoring and understanding your credit report. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time on here, but we'll quickly touch on this as well, as far as what makes up a credit report and how you can find it. Of course, knowing your credit report and your credit score is important. Check your credit reports regularly. Sometimes you may be surprised as far as how easy this is to accomplish. Like myself, I gave this example in the first session. I have a Visa card, and I logged online recently about 2 months ago and noticed that they started giving me my report for free, which I did not know. I don't know how long it was there, but they're giving it to me for free and updating it every month, which is great. There are other ways to obtain it. Early detection to seeing any fraudulent activity or any unusual activity in your own credit scores is important. keys to minimizing damage. That's early detection. You can reach out to different credit bureaus, obtain your credit report and your score from the 3 national bureaus, and if you want to do that all at once, there's a national website, no association with Fidelity, on the screen right now. It's a national website. You can go to annualcreditreport.com and obtain your credit report from the 3 leading agencies out there that obtain our information. Okay, so if you're looking to obtain it all at once, your reports from the 3 leading bureaus, annualcreditreport.com. There's going to be other services there that they can tag on if you want to add. If you want have add-on services that you want to pay for, that's perfectly fine. But if you just want your free report, that's how you can obtain it from all 3 agencies. Tips to keeping good credit. There are a few ways that we can do this. In theory, these are all great, but in practice, they are significantly tougher to do. Stay under 20% of your available credit on any one of your credit cards. So that's tip number 1. The second tip is fairly obvious, but again, easier said than done. Don't spend money you don't have. If you don't have the money to pay for it now, you may not have the money to pay for it in the future all at once. So that's definitely a good tip to follow. Don't open and close credit card accounts often. That can have a negative impact on your credit score because duration, credit time, and horizon is something that is looked at and factored into when it comes to your credit score. Of course, notify creditors of any changes. If you see fraudulent activity, if someone stole your identity, if you changed your name due to marriage or divorce, then that's something you want to notify all of your creditors to. And especially keep an eye on that when you're traveling internationally. So it's something to consider. I always notify my creditors when I travel internationally. That way they know that a transaction overseas is happening and they don't automatically shut it down. They may still do that, which has happened to me in Spain. They didn't approve some transactions or a transaction, so I still had to call back and reapprove it. But it's certainly worth calling your creditors when you do that. And of course, lastly, use caution when transferring balances. There sometimes may be hidden fees when it comes to transferring from one credit card balance to another, so be aware of that. Make sure you read the fine print, and ultimately call the credit card company if you think there are some fees or you're not too familiar with the overall process. The next section, as you see on the screen, is staying on track with your overall financial goals. So we'll talk about developing your own financial personal roadmap, the benefits of consolidating, and how we can help across the board. Of course, developing your financial roadmap is key to success when it comes to planning for retirement or when it comes to planning for short-term or long-term goals outside of retirement. Identify your goals, first and foremost. Create a budget you can live with. Budgeting is important, but it's certainly not something we want you to stress over. Live a comfortable life by all means, but create a budget and make sure you prioritize your goals and make savings for retirement a priority. As you can see in the third bullet, make retirement savings a priority. Plan for your other financial goals accordingly, and ultimately, as you heard us mention, protect what you have with healthcare savings, with adequate insurance coverages, and with beneficiaries across the board. I know we've talked a lot about the different goals, whether they're short-term or long-term. This is just a quick refresher over everything that we've just discussed. So if you are saving for an emergency fund, obviously a sample time frame is going to be short in duration. Less than a year is what it should take you to save. And again, keep it liquid, keep it safe. Money market savings accounts versus college or retirement where you can utilize your 401k plan here at work. Perhaps you have an IRA established outside of work. You can certainly utilize that as well. So the vehicles for saving for these different goals changes along with the sample time frame. It's up to you, the relevance and the ranking of importance here, though. And obviously, as we've mentioned already, retirement is one of the goals that you should have ranked up pretty high, if not at the top of your list. That essentially concludes everything that we wanted to cover in the presentation. What we'll go ahead and do now is pause to see if any questions have come through the website, through the web meeting, and answer anything, other comments or questions that anyone else might have. I'll go ahead and leave it on this screen in case anyone is writing this information down.
Oh, thank you, Miguel. We appreciate you sharing your time and knowledge with everyone here today. We'll now start addressing some of the questions that have been filtering in. So please remember that if you have any questions, you can continue submitting them through the Q&A tool on the webinar menu. As always, you can always reach out to the Financial Wellness Center for any plan-specific questions. So our first one here is, does checking your credit report and score affect your credit negatively?
Not through the three leading agencies. You can go through annual credit report and check it through them, which will not negatively impact it. However, if you are, as you might already know, if you have someone run your credit score or your credit report, perhaps you sign a new lease on an apartment or sign up for a new credit card or buy a new car or a home, they're going to check your score. Those reports can negatively impact it, so make sure that you're not doing it very often. But as far as checking it through the three national leading agencies, which can be done at annual credit report, that in and of itself, all you're doing is asking for the report. That's not going to negatively impact it. What's going to negatively impact it is checking it frequently through some of the modes that I just mentioned.
Great, thank you. And then for someone close to retirement, what do you recommend we do when there is global market turmoil, for example, Brexit?
A great example, since it is very recent in everyone's minds right now. I think the best thing to do is make sure you're allocated according to your goal. So if you are closer to retirement, maybe you're within 5 years of retirement, make sure that you are invested and allocated according to that time horizon. You're only a few years away from retirement. In that example, your asset allocation should be significantly more conservative than someone in their 20s or 30s. Someone in their 20s and 30s can take that impact of Brexit. Because if the markets drop like they have been over the last few days, aside from yesterday, we have another 30 years to go before retiring. If you only have a few years to go before retiring, make sure you're invested appropriate to that goal. So talk to your financial advisor. It looks like you have a financial wellness number here as well that you can reach out to. We have tools and resources on the Net Benefits website. Just make sure you're invested according to that goal, and you should definitely be more conservative than someone younger who can certainly take on more of that risk over the next 30 or plus years.
Okay, great. And actually we got another question regarding Brexit here, and so I think you kind of covered that. It was about how it would affect long-term investments and if it should affect long-term investments. But I don't know if there's anything else you want to add to that. Kind of
I certainly can. So Brexit's going to take 2 years to take into effect if it's not overturned. There are ways that the UK can overturn it. That's still up in the air right now. But I think the panic was instant. That's the world we live in, with social media becoming instant gratification. The minute we heard about Brexit happening, most of the world wasn't even aware it was happening, and that set in panic. And you saw that relayed into the markets. The following day dropped 500 points. The next day I think it dropped 200 or 300 points. Long term, I don't think it's going to be as big of an effect as far as what some of our analysts are saying. It's going to be a short-term impact, but because it has 2 years to go, I think we may have already seen the worst. There may still be some more turbulence going on, but the fact that they have 2 years to figure that out is what bodes well for the economy and for the markets.
Great, thank you so much. So that concludes our webinar session today. Thank you again, Miguel, and thank you attendees for your participation. I hope everyone has a great day, and we look forward to our next webinar series with you. Take care.
Thank you, everybody.